alternative era survivors, groups that have gone the distance. They're still touring. They're still making music.
Still alive.
And that's Roland Orzabal.
And this is not Roland Orzabal.
And that is Kurt Smith of Tears for Fears. Guys, I've interviewed you both before, but never in person together.
That's true, actually, yes. You may have thought we didn't really exist together.
Or you were the same person.
That would be hard to think that, I feel.
Well, the yin and yang.
Yeah.
Well, I am so psyched because I love this new record.
Thank you.
I love this new record. It's called The Tipping Point. It's coming February 17th. And if you listen to my morning show Feedback on SiriusXM Volume, you hear me talking about this record ad nauseum. It's the first record from these guys since 2004. That was Everybody Loves a Happy Ending, which at the time I thought was a new beginning. So why such a long time in between records?
Well, we didn't feel it was a new beginning at all. I mean, the title itself, Everybody Loves a Happy Ending, is a slightly sarcastic reference to Kurt and I getting back together after 9 years of deep, deep hatred and loathing for each other.
At least Kurt's laughing.
I jest. That kind of kicked off a new phase in as much as we found ourselves doing some live shows, a lot of live shows. But we didn't think, we got to go back in the studio. I mean, geographically, I relocated to LA to do Happy Ending. So I was there for 2 years with my family. And then once that project had finished, I went back to England. So you had that distance. But we continued to tour and we became this very successful live act. So lots of good things were happening to us purely on that, with no real desire to make a new record, except we were kind of getting a little
bored.
Tired.
Yeah. Eventually we got to the point where we're playing the set. Now, obviously you have a finite amount of material and we, swapped it around a bunch over the years. But I think we got to a point 6 or 7 years ago when we kind of sat down and thought it really would be nice to introduce new material. So the initial premise of making a new record really was to give us new material to play live. And then, of course, we got involved with, we had management at the time. We also were getting involved with the record company because we were talking about making a new album. So then we had the outside pressure on us to go and maybe work with more modern producers and co-writers. And we went off and did all these sessions over a period of years. They just didn't feel particularly honest to us. And it was really, the driving force was really to make a modern sounding hit single. And we're not, I don't think that's our comfort zone. And it wasn't until 2020 when we sat down, just the two of us, having lost our management and record company at that point in time, and decided ourselves how we should forge a path forward and how we could make this work. We realized we're actually an album band. Let's make an album. Let's make it a journey. The process of doing this album eventually was very easy once we got to that point. It was the journey getting there that took us a long time.
But was there insecurity? Because two guys who are fantastic songwriters, why would you want to work with other people?
Well, because the market changes. For instance, when we did Happy Ending, it wasn't a particularly well-promoted album. But we would go on, say, Ellen DeGeneres. We would play a Call Me Mellow from Happy Ending, which is a very, very catchy song. And we'd look at the sales figures the next day. And people had obviously seen us. Well, I like Tears for Fears. I'm going to go to the record store. So they go to the record store and they buy the greatest hits. They were just selling old product. And then things changed slowly, very, very slowly over the years. So what I joked with Kurt about, if we go away, we become more popular. While we were making Happy Ending, which is really strange coincidence, we have our first number one in the UK at Christmas with Mad World by Gary Jules and Michael Andrews. And then a couple of years later, we've got Lorde coming out with Everybody Wants to Rule the World. And suddenly we're the artist du jour. And then streaming takes off. We're in everyone's living room again. And so that was the climate which led to this new album.
It was meant to be this way.
It was meant to be.
All right, well, let's hear a song now from Roland. You just said you wanted to go away for a little while. Here's a band that never seems to go away. Duran Duran, Notorious. Kurt and Roland from Tears for Fears. It's called The Tipping Point. It's out February 17th. And Kurt, talking about The Tipping Point, you've left the band before. And I read that you considered thinking about leaving the band.
How can you leave a band when there's only two of them?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you did. Then I heard that you thought about leaving the group during the making of this record? I wondered why you wanted to leave and then why you wanted to stay, because that's a really important question too.
It's a weird one because people, you know, you look at it as, that's it, I'm leaving and stamping your feet. It's more of whether, again, we're on the same page or not. We went our separate ways in the first place. I think that was a natural progression for us. We were, you know, in our getting towards late 20s, and I think we were becoming individuals. So it seemed natural for us to want to part ways at that point in time because we needed to really establish ourselves as individuals and not just a member of a band. And I personally went through a hard period of time during the Seas of Love, making the Seas of Love. I went through a divorce at that point in time, but luckily I met my now wife in New York after that divorce and ended up going to New York and loving it and falling in love with New York and starting a life there. So it seemed a natural progression for me to move away from being that guy from Tears for Fears and trying to become my own person. So that was natural. This time around, I think it wasn't a question of leaving a band. It was more of a question of I didn't want to be a part of the music we were making at that point in time. So the decision for me was to whether I wanted to walk away from that. You know, what ended up happening was we ended up agreeing that that music wasn't right for both of us, not just for me. And so when you're talking about that, there is a track called Stay, which was written during that period of time, which is the last track on The Tipping Point. But it was short-lived to the extent that we eventually sat down and both agreed that we didn't particularly like that music that we were trying to write in that period of time, or at least we didn't like most of it. So we decided to, you know, go a different direction. And once we'd agreed on that, there was no question that we were going to make this record.
I'm Laurie Majewski, and today our show theme is Survivors. My guests are Tears for Fears, Kurt and Roland. Do you think, Roland, after all this time, maybe you're more alike than you used to think?
Well, we are, of course, both born in 1961. We are both metal oxes, as the Chinese like to say. We are both the middle son of three boys. We were both raised mainly by our mothers. We have a phenomenal amount in common. I just feel that the older we get, you know, I had a pretty awful year, 2017, lost one of my best friends, lost my wife. And it's like then the wheels came off for me personally. It's at that point you start to realize, well, hang on, I've been friends with Kurt since the age of 13, 14. And you start to think, put it all in perspective. You start to realize that this guy is really important to you, not just musically, not just because of the business, not just because he's made me a ton of money with his singing, you know, but not just because of that, but because it's like our paths and our destinies have intertwined at the right time, you know, so we've really been blessed. And of course, it's not easy. It's not easy because you don't want to be shackled to anything in life, do you? You don't.
No.
But it's strange the way the world works with culture and cultural shifts and zeitgeist or whatever you want to call it. But we seem to pop up when there's a kind of necessary shift in the paradigm. So if that makes sense at all, I don't know and I don't care. But that's why this album, The Tipping Point, feels vital. Happy Ending was fun. It was good fun. This album is deep and it feels like it's important to bring those messages out.
And when you go back to asking whether there, you know, the similarities, whether we're similar or not, the issues we have is normally because we're similar in the sense that we are very strong-willed. We both kind of know what it is we want to do. When that comes together at the same time, it's a joy. But there are times where it doesn't, where, what I really want to do is not what Roland really wants to do, and vice versa. When that happens, it's not going to work.
No.
You know, but this time round, when we got to, early 2020 and sat down together, it was at a period of time where we both wanted to do the same thing. And that's when it's easy. That's when it becomes easy for us. And the recording process becomes simple. I think it's when we're looking for something, and I'm not convinced at that point in time either of us knew what we were looking for.
No.
Well,
we didn't have the muse. It's as simple as that. We didn't have the muse. We didn't have this. I mean, we were focused on one thing. If you could just write out what's important to this creative process, swear word, hit single. That was the only thing. And what you're not doing is you're not using your whole entire mind. You're not opening up to the messages that are flying around in the ether or whatever you want.
And there were a lot of messages.
And there were a lot of messages,
First, guess who I've got here today? Kurt and Roland of Tears for Fears. I want to go back to something you just said about the paradigm shift. I totally believe that. I believe that you are a band that has something to say. And plenty of people make records because it's part of what they feel like it's their job. They've been doing it for 20, 30, 40 years, and it's just their job. Time to make a record now. But there's a sense with this new record, with the Tipping Point album, that I feel like we needed you now. You needed to make music now. And I mean, the Tipping Point itself, which we're going to play on the show, that song itself is exactly what I would expect from Tears for Fears 2022 in terms of, even sonically, it has like a little bit of Everybody Wants to Rule the World in it. But yet it feels like today. We needed to hear that song. We as human beings, as humankind, are we not at the fucking tipping point right now?
Absolutely.
We definitely are, yeah. I mean, the Tipping Point, the song itself obviously has a specific meaning, and it really is referencing, the sadness of Roland's wife passing away. But the Tipping Point, the album title, kind of has a different meaning. That kind of sums up the entire album. I mean, when we're talking about listening to messages coming at you and what's going on in the world, instead of looking for that hit single, what's going on right now? Well, Roland went through a personal crisis at the time. I mean, as he said, he lost one of his close friends, plus, the biggest one, losing his wife, which has got to be the most painful thing ever to go through. So that personal struggle, then you look at the world and what's gone on in the world over the past period of years, from the Black Lives Matters movement to the Me Too movement to climate change to political upheaval here, I mean, nearly overthrowing a government in America, and the rise of the right wing politically worldwide. It's astonishing what's gone on over the past few years. And if we can't channel that into music, then we really have no business being songwriters, in my view. We'll be writing just happy songs that really are just superficial and have no meaning to us. And that's not how we view music personally. That's not how we view it. It's got to have some depth to us and some meaning. So once we got to that point of realizing that we need to be writing about these things, the things we're experiencing, not looking for some... And who the hell knows what a modern hit single is anyway? So what's the point of looking for that? And then, as I said, the process became simple. Once you start mining those emotions and your own feelings and trying to mirror what's going on worldwide, it becomes an easy process.
Did you stumble upon a mission statement, or
kind of?
Did you? Yeah, tell me about that.
Well, it's hard to, without going through every specific song. But yeah, I don't know what it was, but at one point, what we were trying to do shifted dramatically early 2020. And then it's bizarre because then it all feels like, wait a minute, is this a coincidence? I mean, we had this song lying around, The Tipping Point, which, as Kurt just said, was inspired by my wife's illness and literally what is the tipping point between life and death. And to all of a sudden being confronted with images on the television every day in Britain of people in hospitals, all of a sudden you've got this crazy situation where people can't even touch their loved ones. It was bizarre. I mean, there's another song on the album, which is probably my favorite one, called Rivers of Mercy, where you have this absolutely beautiful, calm, serene song written at a time when the rage in the world was incredible with the Black Lives Matter protests and things like that. And so we put the two together. We married a snapshot of the rage with the sounds of the riots at the beginning and the narrator kind of saying, whoa, Jesus, this is horrendous, but what can I do about it? Because I'm only seeing these things from a distance. I am thousands of miles away. So we come up with a song which we believe is almost like the antidote to rage, which is redemption, forgiveness. And so we trample over all these subjects all the way through the album, which is why it's so damn fascinating.
I've got two guys who've stayed the course, give or take. Kurt left the band a little bit. Kurt Smith and Roland Orzabal of Tears for Fears. Well, I want to ask about Break the Man because as a longtime fan of you guys coming out of Woman in Chains, like that, I think I just played that on my First Wave show a few weeks ago. I love that song. I love the play between the woman and man singing. And as a young woman at the time, I loved the message of the song. And then now you have Break the Man at a time when the patriarchy, I mean, I feel like COVID is to teach us a lesson in a lot of ways about the patriarchy. All the guys want to go back to work right now. They want to go back to the office. And the women are saying, hey, wait a minute. Didn't we just learn a lesson about family and taking time for oneself? I wondered if Break the Man came about. Was that a song that you had for a while? Was that a song that came about?
Quite recent. Yeah.
It's quite recent. The inspiration was more, for me personally, you know, I come from a family of, my immediate family now, a very strong wife and 2 very strong daughters. So I have these 3 amazing females in my life. And then I'm watching, obviously the Me Too movement and hoping that my girls, my 2 daughters, have more of a voice in the future than previous generations of women have had.
I'm Lori Majewski, and before we say goodbye today, I want to thank you, Kurt and Roland, Tears for Fears, for hanging out with me. I'm going to be hosting your Artist Confidential, and we are so happy to have you guys in studio with us. There's going to be an audience watching online on Zoom, and it's a joyful thing for us to get to see you together again. For me, this is only like my 3rd concert in 2 years. How does it feel to be here in LA and getting ready to play live together with your band?
Oh, it's been great.
Yeah, I mean, the last few days have been wonderful. I mean, we haven't played with them for couple of years now. It's 2019 was the last time we played with them. So that's been a joy. And also the joy of playing some new songs. So this is the first time in a long time. And realizing, which we now realize because we've rehearsed for a while, the new songs really stand up. I mean, they're not as tight as the old ones yet because we haven't got to that stage. I mean, it's a musical thing, but the older songs, we're at a stage where we don't have to think about them. It's actually all muscle memory now. So you don't have to remember lyrics. You don't have to worry about forgetting lyrics. You don't have to worry about forgetting how to play them. It's all in muscle memory. You just got to let yourself go. The new songs are not quite there yet. So they're not at the stage where we don't have to think about them, but we know as songs, they definitely stand up, which is a great position to be in.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to be playing the song that we're going to go out with now. Everybody Wants to Rule the World. And after what we just said, Lorde comes in and she does her own cover. It belongs to a new generation now, several generations. That must make you guys feel really good, especially because you were not the biggest fans of doing that song in the first place, right?
But yeah, there was a kind of reluctance, I think. It came from the fact that it was very, very different to the material on Big Chair that we were working on. It was written on acoustic guitar, and we didn't have the title. The original title was Everybody Wants to Go to War, which I'm sure wouldn't have taken off as well. But we're very, very lucky because Chris Hughes, our producer, forced us to do the song to the point where we'd be working on the album, and then we would sit down at the end of each day and play it. Just play it. And so all the other parts came, the middle 8, and then eventually the title, Everybody Wants to Rule the World. Once we started recording it, every time the engineer pressed play, we'd go, oh, it's strange. The combination of sounds and the effortlessness of that track. But of course, we had no idea what it was going to go on and do because we were pushing, we'd always had an intensity about our stuff. But then suddenly we let go and Everybody Wants to Rule the World was born.
I think it's not until really recently, to be honest, I mean, considering our long history, that we've realized the strength and advantage of having those tracks that are lighter than the rest of an album, that actually give you some release from the intensity of certain songs. We have a new appreciation for those tracks now. They were needed on those albums, those tracks, because they did give you that time to just enjoy instead of having to think too much, which we tend to make people do.
Well, I'm glad that you made me a thinking person. Thank you so much, Kurt and Roland. And
Thank you.
Seriously, this was a total treat.